All right, so this is actually supposed to be going on outside. I'm dealing with rain right now, and whatever. I'm just going to try and get this across, and hopefully it's not too squished and the ambient noise down where I'm at isn't too loud. Anyway, this past week was relatively crazy if you were paying attention to different areas, particularly symbolism, uh, because a lot of different things went on. The big one was the Pope passing. And we're going to dig into that in a second and why that matters. But what started off and what got me first interested in symbolism this past week was Pageau, Jonathan Pageau. He was taking Candace Owens to task on her presentation of the Star of Remphan, and it's the six-sided. It's the Israeli star, and she's coming in and she's saying, "Well, this is an obvious demonic symbol, whatever." And Pageau is good about presenting when you take something that's being used in a symbolic form and you automatically associate the form itself, not what's being presented, not the intent behind it, but the form itself is something that's evil, then you don't actually have symbolism there. What's going on is that you are taking what's being presented and you're not finding the bridge that's connecting the material with the transcendent. Because if you're not following that bridge, if you're not moving from the material to the transcendent and back and forth, then you don't have symbolism. What you have is a message per se. And there's two major forms of symbolism in that you do have particular symbolism and you have universal symbolism. Particular symbolism is something like the trident with the Navy SEALs. It is branding. It's how Candace was talking about the Star of Remphan. That is particular symbolism in that a group takes an idea and they codify it into one symbol, and that symbol is supposed to represent their message and their group. And that's fine. At the same time, to move past that, you can't, because outside of that particular context, there is nothing symbolic about what they're doing. The trident, divorced from 3 points, divorced from its historic application, and simply as Navy SEALs. If you didn't have the context of Navy SEALs, you wouldn't understand the symbolism of that particular application. And so Pageau digs in on Candace Owens and he says, look, you are taking these combined triangles and you are pulling them out of their context, out of their universal symbolism, and you're applying a particular meaning on it. And when you do that, you're operating in the nonsensical, because you are denying the universal character of something and applying particular. And again, divorced from that particular context, the symbolism is non-existent. It's nonsensical. It's nothing. The big thing with the number 3 as an example of universal symbolism is when you start drawing, when you start creating images, you have one line and then you have 2 lines, or line or line. However you do it, you're not going to have 2 lines making a complete form. But as soon as you bring in that 3rd line, you can have one complete form. And that's why 3 is a divine number. It's why the symbolism of 3 is found in the Trinity in completeness and wholeness. And so it's not that the Trinity, it's not that 3 is the Trinity per se, but that 3 is pointing towards the Trinity. And even if we take out the Trinity, this still goes beyond particular symbolism and it goes into universal symbolism, because again, you now have a complete symbol. This is the issue with the number 3. And this bridge between the material and the transcendent is the only way symbolism operates in its fullness. One of the things as you start digging into symbolism, especially if you're a Christian trying to work out typology and seeing examples in the Old Testament and moving into the New Testament, in Christ talks about this stuff, and he talks about how the prophets were killed and how, there is a rhythm that's occurring in here. If you are not aware, again, of how to ground this symbolism, you're going to take things and you're going to make a mess of it, and you're going to find patterns and observations that can't be applied. And the church, unfortunately, has a big history of doing this. And I'm using the church softly. The Catholics and the Orthodox, they don't really get tripped up on this stuff as much. So this is a Protestant issue. But for example, Peter's cross. How was St. Peter crucified? He was crucified upside down. It was an issue of honor and worthiness to him. Yes, in the 80s and different times, atheists and provocateurs, they've taken an upside down cross and they've said, hey, look how cool this is. Look, we're mocking Christ. Okay, well, that's that instance. That's a form of particular symbolism. And we can ignore that. We can step over that. We can call that out as evil. But that's not a universal form of symbolism. Just to get this point completely across, going back to universal symbolism, another example would be the divine hill, the holy mountain. And that's this idea where, Moses met God on the mountain. The king of a particular community is going to be on the highest hill, is going to be on the mountaintop, looking out over his kingdom. And again, that is the bridge between the material and the transcendent. And so the king is here. He's on top of the hill. He is at the shortest point between the divine and man. And yet he is also acting as chief regent, chief tool of God, because he's closest to him physically, literally, he's closest to him. But then he's also above the people. You can't escape hierarchy, and this is a natural form where the king is operating from atop that mountain, from atop that hill, and he looks out on his people. It's the best way to protect them. It's the best way to be aware of what's being accomplished. There is this wonderful earthiness to symbolism. And if you are separated from that earthiness, you're not actually involved in symbolism. Again, you're involved in particularities. You're involved in a per se symbolism that is denying what symbolism does in its fullness. And so you have to be very aware of that and very careful when you start making claims. Going back to the Pope, Ælþemplær did a great job with saying, he was 88 years old and he died 80 years later. Well, 80 years later, 80 years what? In the 8th decade, what? From the end of World War II? Is this a signal of the fourth turning? Is this? And he was doing that to show that we can get schizo with anything. And it's an absurdity. The same way that Pageau was pointing out that Candace Owens, she was just jumping into absurdity because her symbolism was divorced from its actual meaning, from its universal application, from that bridge between the material to the transcendent. Particularly from the Christian side, I'll jump into it with this. John 10:10 says that the thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. It's echoed in Tolkien in the idea that the evil can't create. It can only twist. It can only confuse. It can only cause chaos. It doesn't actually create. that same verse, John 10:10, it's saying that Christ came to give life and life more abundantly. And that is this fullness of creation. There's this wonderful idea being expressed there that sin collapses under its own weight. It is naturally entropic. It can't continue. And so there's a realism in this universal symbolism in John 10:10 that's being expressed as well, in that still, kill, and destroy. And it's not necessarily the literal form of stealing, of killing, and destroying, all of which are examples of sin, but it's also this chaotic collapse of nature, of creation. And Jesus, on the other hand, is coming and he's providing life in its complete fullness in that bridge between the transcendent and between the earth. That is this symbolism that's being expressed in Scripture, this redemption. This starts digging into the elemental God, and I'll do that in another video, but that was some thoughts on this past week. There's really been a lot of good movements. Definitely follow Pageau, follow Ælþemplær. I'll link this stuff in the description. But if you're going to start delving into symbolism and you're going to say something means something, always take a step back and say, how is this rooted in creation? How is this rooted in the material? And how does this drive me towards the transcendent? Because that bridge is not there. It's not symbolism with merit for the most part. All right. Thank y'all. Have a good one.